Pull out his snake pictures.
Oh, yeah.
All right, it's 6 o'clock, man.
Call the public hearing. Call the public hearing to order. I need a motion to accept the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Alderman Cox, second by Alderman Impey. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Let the record show that all the aldermen are present, along with Mr. Wade Morgan, the city planner. This meeting is for informational purposes only. There will be no back and forth conversation between the aldermen, the presenters, or the public. The alderman can ask a question of the presenters if absolutely necessary for clarification purposes only. No decision will be made tonight. Each presenter will have a maximum allowed time of 1 hour to state their case. At the end of both presentations, there will be a time for public comment, which will allow the public 3 minutes each for a total of a maximum of 30 minutes for the entire public comment section. You have anything to add? I need a motion to open the public hearing.
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Papania.
I'll second.
A second by Mr. Cox. All in favor?
Aye.
We'll have the Sands present first.
Good evening. To begin with, Robert Schwartz here tonight on behalf of the Sands at Front Beach LLC and Butler Homes. I have a packet that we're going to distribute that we have copies for everyone, copies for the clerk. I've already provided a copy to council office. And I'll wait till everyone gets their packets before we begin, if that's acceptable. As a preliminary matter too, I know we're allotted an hour. We have no intent of trying to take that hour up this evening, but I would ask to reserve 15 minutes of my time for rebuttal following the presentation by opposing counsel so that we can try and address any questions you may have or present to try and make a more efficient presentation to the board.
That's fine, but we'll have to allow the other side for rebuttal also then. If needed or wanted. Mr. Schwartz, we need one more copy.
You can have this one, I just need one for later.
Okay.
Sure, I can get an additional copy for you as well. I do. We have a PDF that we'll provide it to the city so you can make your records easier on time. If everyone has that, I'll begin. Again, Robert Schwartz on behalf of the Sands at Front Beach and Butler Homes. We're here tonight, as the board is aware, in response to a court order that was entered by Judge Krebs. And that court order is going to be the first item in the index of documents that we provided to you. We had provided to the court, or provided to the board, both the order bringing us here and an additional opinion from Judge Krebs dating back to 2018, because those are items that the judge wanted you to consider in regards to how these buildings can be made compliant, or to review them in that regard to see if one or both are compliant or could be made so. It's our opinion that the buildings that are currently constructed on the site can be made compliant in accordance with your existing zoning regulations. We have a number of documents to go through in that regard and some supplemental information that we'll provide as well. I think everyone is aware of what the zoning classification is at this time, which is R1A. That allows for luxury apartments, and it also allows for the construction of townhomes on this site. And the court previously threw out portions of the UDC, the change in R1A to a different classification. So we are operating under the prior R1A designation. That provision is Exhibit 4 in our index, and we also have as Exhibit 3 the R1 designation because of the setbacks and items that are relevant to that. We have prepared a number of items, including having the existing buildings reviewed by an engineer. We had Robert Niesel go out and review the existing structures, and he has provided an affidavit to you that is also part of our presentation. That is going to be item number 6. Mr. Niesel was asked to look at a number of items. He was asked to look at how the buildings are currently constructed, where the buildings sit in relationship to the streets today, their height and other items to determine if they could be modified to either increase the distance between the streets and the exterior faces of the structure, and alternatively to reduce potentially the height of the building that is on Front Beach that we refer to as the Brumfield residence. And for purposes of our presentation and the documents that we provided to you, that house is the Brumfield residence, and the smaller one behind it is referred to as the Butler residence, just for our presentation purposes. Mr. Niesel is of the opinion, and he is of course a professional engineer with more than 35 years of experience, that the structures can be modified as they currently sit to reduce the size of those structures if required by your existing code or your building department, to give us additional setback from both Martin Avenue as to both structures. There is no current issue with the front yard setback of the Brumfield residence because it is more than 25 feet from Front Beach or Front Beach Drive. So that's not an issue that should be present, and I don't believe that's going to be contested this evening. One of the issues raised previously by council opposite was their belief that the residences as constructed were too close to Martin Avenue and did not have a sufficient setback. So Mr. Niesel has looked at that issue, looked at all the plans, reviewed both that and the actual construction, and has given an opinion that those buildings can be scaled back or reduced in size. You would basically take a portion of it off of the side facing Martin from one or both buildings. We also had this verified, excuse me, from a distance and size standpoint by a professional surveyor, Clifford Crosby. And Mr. Crosby's affirmation, and which is in essence an affidavit, is one of our other numbered exhibits tonight, exhibit number 10. So we have information to show to the board that if you require, or your planning department requires, alterations to those buildings from a setback standpoint, it can be accomplished. That will not compromise the structural integrity of either home. In addition, we can, if required to meet your existing code, bring the height down on the Brumfield residence. It has currently some parapet walls and some other decorative features that artificially increase the height of the structure. They're not structural though in nature and are not necessary. And we provided to you information showing that those could be removed. That is of course addressed in the affidavit of Mr. Niesel. And separate and apart from that, it's addressed in Exhibit 9, which are some color representations of what could be done as far as modifications to those buildings to both lower the height and to potentially increase the setback from Martin Avenue. So those will go through both building options with you, one by one. And if you would like to look at that, if you would go to Exhibit 9, the first item that you will see is the depiction, first of all, of the Brumfield residence, which shows how the building could be cut down to reduce the chimney or the parapet walls to, of course, bring that down between 8 and 10 feet in height is the amount that we could reduce it if it was required pursuant to your planning and zoning codes. That is shown on both the first 2 pages of that exhibit. The third page of that exhibit will show you how we could reduce the size of the buildings and increase the setback from Martin Avenue by removing the roof above and certain exterior structures and then attach the 2 units together. So these 2 units can, if the code requires or your planning department request, be made into a single one building. by adjoining the two. The rest of that exhibit shows how the orientation of the buildings would be changed facing Martin Avenue, and shows you generally the areas that would be removed in order to increase the setback. My client's desire is simply to comply with whatever the city will mandate to keep their existing structures in place and to move forward with their development. We are several years into this litigation at this point, and although they have proposed what I believe were several very good positive projects for this area, they have gotten a great deal of objection from a particular neighbor or group of neighbors. And since the court has ruled that some of the prior plats were not properly done, our sole goal is to reach full compliance so that there's no issue with going forward with the development of that property. We have also provided to you information regarding the elevations of the properties. Specifically, exhibits 7 and 8 are the under construction elevation certificates, giving you the relative heights and distances and floodplain information for both buildings. Number 7 being for the Butler residence and number 8 being for the Brumfield residence. As I mentioned earlier, of course, this particular zoning district allows for the uses as both townhomes or luxury apartments. The two existing structures that were there were originally designed to be more of the single-family townhome regime because they were going to be independently occupied. We can, however, convert those, and we provided to you as exhibits number 11 and 12 plans that show how both of these units can be converted to apartments in the event that the same is required for compliance. Again, we believe we can be compliant under either scenario because both townhomes and apartments are allowed under the existing R1A district. But if there was any concern from the city, that would allow for modification of the same into an apartment dwelling that will also be compliant with R1A. So what we have is both information from engineers and surveyors that say that the buildings can be made compliant with whatever your requirements may be. We have, of course, attempted to decipher the codes as best possible. It's a unique situation where you have R1A from a prior code being reinstated and then a set of new codes that you also have to deal with. So we believe we have answered the relevant questions on setback and size. We're not here to propose a new project at this point. We're simply here to address the court's requirements regarding compliance for the two existing units, which we think can be done as is set forth in the documents that we've provided. I would further note that in the event that the planning department believes that any aspect of the units as they exist today or as we propose to modify them are not compliant, we are certainly willing to do whatever the planning department requires so that they would be compliant. I think that the matters we've proposed do not require any variances at this point because they are modifications that can be made that would not require a variance because we would then be inside all existing and required setbacks and limitations. However, a third option would be that the owners could petition the board for a variance if that was required. However, we're not here seeking a variance. We want to be 100% compliant to try and avoid further issues and disputes with the neighbors. It's my sincere hope we can do that, although if history is any indicator of what we'll be doing again, I'm sure we'll probably be in court regardless of what the city provides for following this hearing. We have attempted, for your information as well, to try to work with the neighbors and have tried that again recently to see if we could reach some form of a compromise where we could get a nice development completed, and we have to date been unsuccessful in that regard. But we still are working and are hopeful that at some point we can find some common ground with the neighbors so that everyone can live in peace and harmony if possible. I'm happy to answer any specific questions that you may have. But again, I want to try and limit our discussion this evening to just compliance of the 2 units and not proposal of any new project or anything else that may be in the future.
Mr. Mayor, can I get one clarification?
Sure.
Robert, you presented the first proposal and then a second and a third. Is that your order of priority that you want the city to consider? The first one, and if it cannot be compliant, then you want the planning department to go to 2. If 2 can't go to,
Yes, to be clear, we think that the information we provided and the proposed modification of the buildings would bring them into full compliance because they would address any potential setback issues that could exist today, and they would also address any potential height issues that could exist today under the R1A code. So our first goal is complete compliance, and we believe that this would accomplish that. Of course, I have no idea what the opponents believe, and I'm sure I'm going to hear about it in a few minutes as to what can or can't be done. If our proposal does not work, and of course we have a small window of time to supplement the record to provide you additional information as to things that come up tonight or questions that the board may have regarding the project, and we will certainly do that as well. But if that can't be accomplished and the city will tell us anything else that is required to become compliant, my clients are willing to do that. We are working in somewhat of a vacuum because I think that at this point it's very difficult for the city's planning department to be able to communicate with any of the parties because there has been a great deal of litigation by the neighbors and numerous public record requests, and every time we ask for something we seem to have a problem that the neighbors are unhappy that somebody's trying to find out what we can do with the property. So we have done all this without the benefit of being able to talk directly to planning. And so if you think there's something else that needs to be done, we're willing to entertain that and to try and do it to be fully compliant. And planning has been helpful to the extent they could. It's certainly nothing that they have refused to participate with us, but based on this volume of litigation, we've had 3, 4, 5 lawsuits now. It's very difficult for us to get much moving in that regard. And then obviously if options 1 or 2 don't work, then we could certainly, as a third option, seek a variance if there's something that the city believes we need to do that we can't do. I don't think that's going to be a reality though, because we can move buildings, we can remove parts of them, we can lower the heights of them, and we can do any of those things to make us in compliance. And based on the overall size of the site and the fact that we only have 2 existing structures, there's no issues regarding density and other items that were previously at issue in appeals that were brought to the circuit court. Because we have 5.56 acres here, a little over 242,000 square feet, and we're currently only trying to make sure that we have compliance for 2 existing structures. We readily recognize, though, that any future development of the balance of the property would of course require full compliance with your zoning ordinances and regulations, and would require us to go through whatever additional processes the board may require, including plats or other matters, depending on the ultimate use of the property, whether it's luxury townhomes or apartments. So, yeah,
That's it.
if that answers your question. I'm sorry if I wasn't very clear in that regard. So,
Sure.
we have also agreed, just there's one item that we were not able to provide to you yet today. Our surveyor, unfortunately, is ill. I'm afraid he may have COVID, but he was able to give us all the survey dimensions showing the setbacks of the property. It's one of the exhibits that's there. I have also asked him to give us certifications as to the various height levels of the property, which we will be able to supplement and provide to you during the 7-day period. But with all candor to the body, he was not able to do that because he was ill, and I didn't want to fail to present what we had already. But we will supplement that information for the record, so you'll have it and the planning department can verify it. We also, of course, have no objection to the city or the planning department verifying any of the information that we've provided, both providing access to the property, interior, exterior, or otherwise, to confirm that these modifications can in fact be made and would meet your existing codes. Are there any other specific questions or general items that I could answer for the board?
I don't think so, Mr. Swartz. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe that Mike Butler would like to address the board very briefly, and then I'll reserve my time for rebuttal following Mr. Geis's presentation.
Okay.
Okay, my name's Mike Butler. With Butler Homes in the Sands. I'm a little bit more emotional about the project. I'm not as detailed as Robert was, but I just want to be brief. Basically, at the end of the day, I can't believe that I'm still standing here 3.5 years later. I did an interview on the news, I think it was 1.5 years ago, and I told the guy, I said, when I tell this story, people don't believe it. And I'm not kidding y'all when I tell you, I've told this story probably 5 times in the last week, and people still look at me and shake their head, and they can't believe it. So, you know, from my perspective, I got a lot of things going on. I got 2 young kids. You know, just from a personal perspective, life is busy. Life is way too short to be fighting over something for 3.5 years. You know, I think it's time we put it to bed. Let me tell you something. Life is too short for Lee Brumfield, who didn't get to live in that house that he wanted to live in. And I thank God that I still get to work with Lee Brumfield on this project. And his brother Al has been a great guy. He stepped up in his place, and I thank you, Jennifer, for introducing me to Lee Brumfield. So let me tell y'all a couple of quick points. I'm gonna break down what Robert did in layman's terms so you guys can understand it a little better for those of you that may not understand. Basically, he said we're gonna take those 2 buildings and we're gonna make them compliant. Whatever you tell me the height limitation is, I'll bring it down. I don't care what it is, I'll bring Lee's building down. I will not tear that building down willingly. God willing that y'all help me with this situation. Whatever that height limitation is, I'll bring it down and I'll make it work. The setback, whatever you guys tell me the setback is from Martin Avenue, whatever that setback is, I'll pull it back. I'll make it work. That building, I'm a builder. I mean, I can build things. I build things all the time, so we can make the buildings compliant. That's not an issue. I mean, those are elevated structures. We're talking some beam work, a little bit of modification, and that's it. So our goal is 100% compliance. Robert made that point several times. All we want to do is comply. Comply, comply, comply. I cannot say that word enough. I want the future development that we do with this project. I know we're not here to talk about that tonight, but we're working on our plat right now, and that plat will be ironclad. It will be ironclad for a multifamily development. There will be no gray area. If y'all see a gray area, I'm gonna say, what is that? And I'm gonna go, let's go back to black and white. I'm not playing in any gray areas anymore. I'm over this stuff. So it'll be ironclad, and it's going to be multifamily attached dwellings. That's it. The dream, the project, the Sands is 100% dead as far as I'm concerned. We made an offer. They asked to meet. We made an offer about 1.5 weeks ago. We offered them 36 units. There was previous 41 units. We offered them 36 detached units. The reason we offered 36, 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, they offered us 38, but they wanted a front beach exit. So they had 38 units with a front beach exit. To the advice of my attorney, and after talking with Mr. Al, and after talking with my partners, we decided, you know what, we're tired of this. Let's go 2 units under what they previously asked us for, and let's put this thing to bed. I actually got a little excited about it. You know, I said, man, maybe this is finally gonna happen. You know what they said? They said, your offer doesn't meet the threshold for negotiation. We offered 2 units less than what they wanted, and they told us that our offer didn't meet the threshold for negotiation. So what does that tell me? That tells me that they don't want to negotiate. This has been delay tactic since day one. I'm trying very hard not to offend anybody right now. But obviously, guys, when you put as much time and energy and effort, I was 35 years old when I started this project. I'm 40 years old now, okay? Anyways, as far as I'm concerned, y'all won. Congratulations, you are the winners. You have won. You've held us up for 3.5 years. We can no longer put this project down.
Mr. Butler,
Now
address the board, please.
I'm sorry, okay.
Address the board.
I got you. Okay, you guys win. It's held up for 3.5 years. Y'all are winners. At the end of the day, since we gave them what we thought they would be happy with, I don't understand the goal anymore. I'm hoping that Mr. Alon will get up here today and explain the goal to us. And at the end of the day,
how to make these houses
Ma'am.
Let's have order, please.
So my
We're
point
talking
here
about-
is that, my point here, you're right, I apologize, is we want to be compliant. I want to be compliant with my buildings, I want to bring them into compliance, and I want to be compliant with my new project that I offer, and I want to make sure that we can all work together collaboratively to make sure that we make that compliant. I told you guys I'm a little emotional. I apologize. When you guys put this much time into something as we have, it's emotional, it's personal. You know, this is not business for me, it's personal. So I appreciate y'all hearing me. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you, Mr. Butler. Okay, we're here to address the compliance of the two structures. Let's keep the conversation to that, please. Mr. Geis, you are that woman.
I always have to move the speaker down. I'm William Geis, law firm Russian & Geis, Ocean Springs, Mississippi. I tried a case for 8 weeks one time, and the lawyer on the other side was very tall, and he pulled everything up high, so when I came, I had to keep reaching up. It's just part of being short. This is what we're going to do, and hopefully it's not going to take but a few minutes. I am prepared a PowerPoint. We're going to go through it and chat about it. It's in your book. The way this is organized is I'm going to talk about some general rules first, and they can become more specific. The reason I do the general rules is so that everyone can understand what a reviewer of zoning, what their duties are, and what is charged upon them. Then we will talk about compliance and what they can and can't do and what we see as issues. So the first rule is a public entity should aid its citizens in the enforcement of zoning rules and ordinances. The office of the entity is not to tell people how to get around something, it is how to say, these are the rules and this is what you must do, comply. And for what Robert said, we may be there, that you're going to tell them what they have to do to comply, and if they can, they will do so. That is progress. The second rule is asking forgiveness in lieu of asking for permission is not an acceptable approach to building code violations. They should be doing things correct up front. I know people are emotional, but they're emotional because they didn't do it correct at the beginning. And that's why we're here today. Next rule is, you're going to learn that R1 is going to apply to these structures as they sit today. The front yard setback is 25 feet. The side yard setback is 10 feet. The rear yard setback is 25 feet. That's going to be important when you look at these two buildings. The height restriction is 35 feet measured from the elevation requirements of the adopted floodplain management maps. And we're going to show those maps in here, and we're going to show what they said on their applications for the building permits, that that's at 20 plus 1. It actually should be 20 plus 1.5, but that's the way it came out. The 2018 sketch plan is out. The 2019 code applies. The property is R1A. A home for a single size in square footage of the property is 13,500 square feet. The whole lot that they're on doesn't equal 13,500 square feet. For a single family home, R1A applies the provisions of R1. Now, they talked about variances, and we're going to just touch upon that briefly for a moment. A property owner cannot get a variance for a hardship which the property owner created. You can't do it. And it's in your code. It's in the law. And if you look at Mr. Hyde, Craig Hyde of Neil Schaefer, and his CV's in here, he has a letter that's going to speak to this and basically echo most of what I am saying. He says in there, the application shall demonstrate that the existing conditions and circumstances are such that strict application of the provisions of the UDC provisions would deprive the applicant of reasonable use of said land, building a structure equivalent to the use made of lands, buildings, or structures in the same district and permitted under the terms of this provision, and that the particular conditions and circumstances are not the result of the actions of the applicant. This is kind of a you pays your money and takes your choice provision. They went forward, they designed it, they planned it, they built it, and frankly, they built it after some people said don't build it and suggested to wait. They bought it, so they can't get a variance for it. No matter where you go, he's not going to be able to get a variance for it, not legally. In calculating density, one may not include roads or wetlands, thus there are approximately 4 acres in this. I know they gave you a total number, but there's about 4 acres usable for the project. I only bring that up because lot size will be a question and for consideration for compliance. You cannot grant a variance for use. To do so is spot zoning. Now, this is going to be important because we're going to have to look at what is permitted on these lots under R1A and R1. And the way it is going to work is that R1A brings in R1 and it gives you every use under R1, R1A does, except for 2 things that Robert indicated, townhouses and apartments. Townhouses get to be problematic, and I would submit the 2 buildings we have will not qualify as townhouses under any circumstance. So we can exclude those from consideration. At this point in time, they are single-family residents. Their applications for building permit said single-family dwelling. That's what they promised the city they were going to build, and that's what in fact they build. And as Mr. Hyde pointed out, any layperson driving by and ask, what is that? They're going to say that's a single-family residence. Granting of numerous variances is in effect spot zoning and thus a use variance. You cannot give a use variance. So you give a number of variances, you change the use of the building, and you cannot do that. The width of a lot at the building line is 100 feet. That is where the house is located, where it's built. You have to have 100 feet to be compliant. So not only do we have to have 13,500 feet, we have to have 100 feet to be compliant at that width. It's possible to do that, I think, with 1 of these buildings, not 2. Where 3 zoning districts apply, i.e. R1, R1A, and waterfront view, the most restrictive requirement will apply. Section 501 of your code echoes that very statement. Otherwise, you would really be gutting your zoning laws by overlay code, so you're always going to go to the most restrictive. And I'm going to submit to you that this one is R1 because we have 2, and we have a 35-foot height requirement we'll talk about. The law of the case. These 3 opinions are what govern what we must do. And now the law of the case is kind of a lawyer term. It really means when the courts rule, whether it's an appellate court or court in a particular case, their rulings become the law that we have to follow throughout that case. And the law of the case now are those 3 opinions, and I have those attached in the documents you have, and they are going to govern how we can act and what the status of this property is. uses under R1. The first set of uses here, and the ones we really are concerned about, are detached single dwellings, not including mobile homes or shell homes, and attached accessory buildings. We don't have any gazebos in controversy or cemeteries, so we're okay. But these are permitted uses. The next slide is, these are uses that you can gain by permission, by requesting of the Planning Commission permission to do that, and after having a hearing. Again, that is not controversy. But the uses are important, as I said before. As we go to the R1A, if you'll go to the next slide, please. We're allowed to do townhouses and apartment units. A townhouse is defined as a one-family dwelling in a row of at least 3, but not more than 6 such units in which each unit fulfills the following requirements. It has its own yard and entrances, and they're not over each other, they're capable of being located on a separate lot, etc. What's interesting about this, and it took me a while, this is such an easy point, but it took me a while to grasp it, that excludes duplexes. So the 2 buildings, if you join them, cannot be operated as a duplex. It can only be operated as a single-family dwelling, or perhaps the apartment, which this is the first I've heard of that, so I'll give that some thought. I will say, once we get into the R1A requirements, we get into a whole different level of setback requirements, because R1A requires side setbacks to be 50% of the height if it's over 35 feet. So if you have a 50-foot building, we have to have a 25-foot side setback as opposed to the 10. So it changes how this is ruled. Height, what is allowed is 35 feet for a single-family dwelling. It's measured from the elevation of the adopted floodplain management maps, which is 20 feet. There were 3 different measurements, one for R1, one for R1A, and one for the Waterfront Preservation District. Waterfront Preservation District would apply behind the R1. The Waterfront Preservation District height is 40 feet. The R1 is 35 feet. The Waterfront Preservation District, I think, is going to apply regardless of the type of structure you're putting in there. R1 governs these particular structures. I have in here the floodplain maps, so you can see how we got to the 20 feet. It's a VE base elevation 20. The next slide is the setback requirements that compare the 2, and this really speaks to the equality of these between R1 and R1A, with the exception of the enhancement for R1A side setbacks if it's over 35 feet. So that's one of the measurements we have to go through, in particular if the lot changes. The next few slides, that's lot size again, building permits for your review, really, to see what was requested and what we have. And now we have the surveys, and we have a survey attached with the height to these documents. This is a simplified version of the survey. Building 1, which I think they're calling the Broomfield building, we call it Building 1, the one on the beach, is its elevation is 68.7 feet. 68.7 feet. Building 2's elevation is 58.7 feet. For reasons I don't know, their lowest horizontal member was 23.1, which was kind of giving away 2 feet, but that was a choice that we made. It should have been 20 feet building permit says 20 feet plus 1, your code says 20 feet plus 1.5. So it should have been 21.5. Next slide. This is how you do the math. 20 feet plus the 1.5 freeboard plus the 35 feet equals 56.5 feet. That's what the height of these buildings in this floodplain can be. That's the maximum height. So we see for building number 1, the required is, we've talked about, is 13,500 square feet lot. Front is 25, side is 10, rear is 25. We're going to talk about that rear in a second. The height is 68.7 measured. The lot size is 3,600. That will have to increase to the 13,500 to make it compliant. The setback in the front is correct by 0.8 of a foot. The side setback, I believe, is not going to be correct. The rear 10 feet to building 2. Now here's where the interest comes in. The distance between measuring engineering drawings between building 1 and building 2 is 10 feet. Building 1 is to have a 25-foot setback, and building 2 is to have a 10-foot side setback, totaling 35 feet. Where those two buildings sit at this time, they cannot be made compliant. I don't know how much cutting you need to do, but it's not going to be made compliant. If they were to make this one big building, which I have not studied, and we may have some problems with that, that could possibly bring it into be compliant. They would still have to have the 100-foot wide lot. They would still have to have the total 13,500 feet, and you still have to have all the other setback requirements from the street. Now, if we turn our attention to, let me go back if you would, please. Do you know how to do that? Okay, there you go. They have to reduce the height by 10.2 feet. And it is something perhaps that can be done. I don't know, frankly, but it has to be reduced by 10.2 feet. Okay, we go to number 2. Building number 2, we have the same requirements. The measured height is 58.7, so we only have to reduce the height by 2.2 feet, assuming it stays as an independent building. We have to increase the lot size. We have to think about the distance between the two buildings and how we're going to correct that, which I don't know that you can correct it unless you combine the buildings in some way. It's too close to building number 1. It's too close to the street, which I think has been acknowledged. This is a street where we measure 25 feet from the center line, and that becomes the line to which you measure, and there isn't enough setback on this one. Can building number 2 serve as an annex or auxiliary building for building number 1? I was doing a little problem gaming at this point, and this seemed like one logical offering to bring this into compliance. The problem will be the height issue. To be an auxiliary building, you can only be a story and a half. You measure that from the 20-foot mark plus 1.5. Thus, the math turns out to be 36.5 feet. Now, how did I get the 15 feet? Your code says a story and a half. The average story is 10 feet, but it also indicates in another portion of the code that the maximum that the half can be is 5 feet, again confirming the 10 feet. And the 5 feet is there so the pitch of the roof will not allow a normal sized person to stand. It's actually expressed that way. So it has to be a subordinate building and to the main building, It's generally, in one part, they refer to it as garages and serving quarters. I don't know anyone that has lived-in servants, but I guess it could be. It would be terribly difficult to make that an auxiliary building, given the height involved. We would end up with a very small floor and with the half attic. I don't think it's a practical solution, but it's one that's in the code. There is next a petition signed by, I believe, 89 people to support the position of the appellants in this matter. That is a distribution map. That shows really the people who signed the petition that live near the property. There are others more distant, but if you can see that those who live about the property signed it and are asking that the zoning ordinances be appropriately and properly carried out. Then we have a letter from Michael Craig High. He is a senior person with senior planner with I forgot the name. Neil Schaefer, I'm sorry. Old guys do forget. He's a senior with Neil Schaefer, and he is actually, in his resume, you'll find he's even represented the city in the past as an advisor. And pretty much you're going to see in his letter, he walks through everything I've just said, and that the difficulties in maintaining the buildings, given their relative proximity, and the difficulty of getting any variances with respect to same. We will, in our materials over the next few days, respond to the proposals that were made tonight. I do believe that there are some ways that these could be made compliant. I think the most obvious way to make these compliant is to remove building number 2, the so-called Butler building, and make building number 1 be on a proper size lot, have the proper widths, get the proper distances from the street, and lower the 10-point fraction feet and move on. I thank you for the opportunity to be here. There's some other comments I wanted to make, which I'm going to reserve for another time. Some overall problems I'm going to see with the project from an environmental standpoint and a water drainage standpoint, one of my pet peeves. But I must say, I understand the emotions involved. I did not appreciate, and I felt it very inappropriate, to bring to you a misstatement of the settlement negotiations and the good attempts that have been made being disparaged here. Trying to make good people look like they're not trying to get this done when it was not that way. And the response that they got was my response. I take full credit for that. It was because we told them there was a threshold issue, and they didn't address it. They addressed other things. And we're willing to negotiate. We have always been willing to negotiate. I have been reaching out since I have been in this case, which is not very long. I've had to spend a little time learning this case. I think I understand it. There are some solutions, but it's got to take give on every side. And we should be exploring that, because I can see that someday there'll be something on this property, but it may not be in my lifetime, because there's a lot of issues to be resolved beforehand, and it is a waste of money, it is a waste of time, but everyone has to meet at the table. I thank you very much for your attention. Do you have any questions of me? Thank you.
Thank you, guys. We'll give each party a rebuttal period, starting with there's a lot of time that's remaining, so I think you have about 35.33.
We will be much briefer than that. Thank you.
And then, Mr. Geis, you'll have that opportunity also.
I'll try and be very brief in rebuttal and just address some of the things that Mr. Geis mentioned to you. One of the items that he mentioned was that we couldn't get a variance, and he made the implication that we did something wrong by applying for building permits and getting building permits for these two original buildings. I think the board's well aware of this, but everything that we did in the construction that's currently in place was done under permits issued by the city. Although we all know the history, there was an original plat approved by the city. We pulled building permits pursuant to that plat, and those structures are built in compliance with that. That plat was ultimately vacated. I don't dispute that. That's, in fact, Mr. Geis and I do agree on some things. I noticed we have a lot of the same exhibits and relevant information to present to you. But we did nothing wrong by building those structures, and it comes off as if we are now to be penalized for having followed the rules that applied to us at that point, and now seeking to again comply with the rules of the city. Mr. Geis mentioned several times that we couldn't meet lot size requirements. Well, to be clear, there are no lot size requirements in place at this time other than minimum lot sizes. And I do agree that the code has minimum lot sizes, but we have 5.56 acres. There is not a recorded plat that's in place at this point that restricts the current division of the property. So there is ample property for any lot size that the city requires for the two existing structures to be in place, regardless of whether that was 13,500 square feet or otherwise. In addition, joining those two buildings together, which would be both permissible from an engineering standpoint and I believe from your code standpoint, would alleviate a multiple lot allocation requirement for that. And again, I defer to your building department, and we will of course comply with whatever they tell us is required in that regard. Although naturally I didn't have Mr. Geis's materials before we got here any more than he had ours, but I took just a moment during his presentation to look at, for example, the report of Craig High. It provides a different height than Mr. Geis represented to the board as from their surveyor. In fact, Mr. High's statement is, again, appears to be overestimating the height of the building. But one thing that I don't think has even been factored in is that even if you took Mr. Geis's calculations as correct, and I think they're overstating the height of the Brumfield building on the beach, it wouldn't matter, because under his scenario we can still bring them into compliance by reduction of the height through removing the parapet walls, the chimney, and those other structures. Now, will it be as attractive? No, it won't be. But however, we want to be 100% compliant. We're going to do whatever you direct us to do, and if that makes the project less aesthetically pleasing, that's not our desire, but we will do whatever you direct or whatever the city directs for compliance. Mr. Geis also mentioned the 100-foot lot requirements. I do agree that there is a provision in the code for a 100-foot lot requirement, but in that the property is not currently subdivided, in that the prior plat was set aside, there is no issue with allocating a 100-foot lot or even a larger lot or multiple lots to comply. So we will certainly address each of the matters that are in the materials that Mr. Geis presented in our supplemental materials to be provided to you over the next 7 days. And I will try and make this very short. So any other questions I could potentially answer regarding our presentation?
Not at this time. Thank you, Mr. Schwartz. Mr. Geis, do you have anything else?
One brief thing. Chimneys in the parapets are not the issue. Chimneys allowed to be 3 feet, as I recall, above the height limits. They are in addition to, not counted in. The measurements we have are to the top gable, which is what the code calls for. And that is where we measure the height. And is top gable the roof line. And that, and whatever that turns out to be, that's where the total of that I did on the math, which I believe was 56 and change, that's what it has to measure, or less. Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, we'll allow 30 minutes maximum for public comment.
Mr. Mayor, if I could, it may be the appropriate time for me to enter the correspondence Mr. Geis had asked me to make part of the record.
Okay.
So, Billy, pursuant to your request, all correspondence between your office and my office about this hearing is being entered. And just for the record, we have, the city has set forth a procedure that both parties have until next Friday at 5:00 p.m. to supplement anything for this record. And afterwards, as the planning department starts reviewing all this, if they have a question, they're going to send it through me, and irrespective of who it's directed to, it will be sent to both of you to respond.
That's our understanding too.
Okay. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. So we'll allot a maximum of 30 minutes for public comment. Remember that this hearing is all about compliance of those 2 buildings, so we will not get into any personal issues between builder or the neighborhood, surrounding members of the neighborhood. So if anyone would like to address the board in regards of compliance of the buildings, you need to approach this podium there, state your name, your address, and you'll have 3 minutes. Yes, sir.
Name's Greg Williams, 27 Savoy Court, Ocean Springs, Mississippi. Professional realtor, developer, investor since the early 70s right here in this wonderful city we call home. I address you in 2 separate positions. First, that as a private citizen who's concerned for the welfare of all, not just 89 people on a petition, but for the best for all. And second, of a person who owns property that is similarly zoned. And what happens here is of great concern to me for my ownership of that property. One of my best friends in the world is sitting opposite to me over there, Mr. Skip Baxter. When all this came out, I told him that he should get down on his hands and knees and thank the city. Even though we were without, at that time, as I read the ordinance, I don't know where Mr. Geis's definition of townhome came, but as I read the ordinance, we were without a definition of townhomes. But I thank you, those that were departed here, but I thank the prior board, even for looking and seeing that certainly what Mr. Brumfield was proposing was much better than apartments, and not searching into the depths of our ordinance to see exactly what a townhome definition was. You were trying to serve the public, and that is the intent of the law. So the question is the intent of the law versus how it's
Mr. Mayor,
That's
we're going to
all.
continue this. You've said it a number of times, this discussion.
So please, we were gonna address the compliance of the buildings.
And
I'm hoping you're gonna get there.
I absolutely am, Mayor, and I
Okay,
thank you for redirecting me. So in saying that, let's look at the compliance of the building. We had a wonderful presentation on single-family homes. And if I ever try to develop single-family homes, I have good counsel on showing me how to stay within the ordinance by that PowerPoint. But I heard Mr. Butler say that he was going to change everything to make them apartments, which was exactly what you good city fathers was trying to avoid in the interest of the public to begin with. And so, let him go forward. The highest and best use of that property is not single-family. It will never be single-family. So with its apartments, I ask you to bring in the highest and best use for those other than 89 people so you can get the highest tax base possible in this city and bring all of us forward and reduce our taxes. As to the variances, I ask that you give them each and every variance that they ask for.
It's time, thank you.
Damn, thank you.
Megan, set that to 3 minutes.
Yeah, I did.
Okay. Is there anyone else in the audience who would like to address the board?
Michael on 303 Front Beach Drive. Good evening, Mayor.
Good morning, Michael.
I wasn't planning on standing up and saying anything tonight because this meeting was about compliance with the 2 buildings. But this group has allowed multiple speakers to get up and rehash old ground. One of the things that's been particularly distasteful for us throughout this process has been learned attorneys on the other side repeatedly saying that we are the ones that are bringing the lawsuits, and by intimation suggesting that we're at fault for all of this.
I'm gonna give you a little bit of latitude because I gave everybody else a little bit of latitude, but we're gonna get to compliance here shortly.
Yes,
Okay.
I agree. That's what we're here for. The people that live around the property, the people that signed that petition, are not the people to be blamed for this. The city worked with the developer to promote non-compliant development more than 3 times the number of units. Units that were purposefully designed to be flipped to short-term rentals. That's why we started off this. I am delighted to switch the subject. I am delighted to hear that now Mr. Schwartz is talking about the R1A, the way it's supposed to be applied. The city has nothing to fear about non-compliant, dense apartment developments. You cannot legally do it. You can do luxury apartments, but they have to fit the R1A zoning ordinance. Too many people are following the talking points of the developer and those that are trying to influence outcomes through social media and otherwise.
All right,
That's not what we're here for. We're here to talk about compliance, and if the city will finally start to apply its zoning ordinance. We won't have strip joints, and we won't have loud bands to pressure us into accepting anything less than compliance. I thank you for your time.
All right, now I've given everybody a little bit too much latitude here, and we're not going to do it any longer. If you have something to discuss with the board that deals strictly with compliance of these 2 buildings, you may speak for 3 minutes. If you do not approach the bench, please. Is there anyone else that wants to speak to the board about this?
I do.
Scott, I need compliance here.
We're in compliance, and I'll be very brief. I'm
Okay.
Scott Edwards at 409 Wolf Drive. I'm addressing this new board. Mayor, I want you all to know my personal position with this, and my request to you is simply this: to follow R1A guidelines. Compliance, we ask that you not issue variances or special provisions for what this may be. That's as simple as it is for what we're dealing with tonight. So follow R1A guidelines, no variances, no special provisions. Thank you. How's that?
Thank you. Perfect.
I'm Karen Stennis, and I live at 399 McGinnis, not far up the beach from that, from the Sands project. And I've been to the board many times, and probably every time I've come to the board, it's been about complying with zoning laws. And as a citizen of this town and of this ward, I'm asking you to comply with the law. That's all any citizen wants you to do. And it hasn't been done in the past, or we wouldn't be in this situation. Please comply.
Thank you, Ms. Dennis. Anyone else? Need a motion to close public hearing? Moved by Mr. Alderman. Second by Mr. Cox. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Need to make a motion to go into closed session, Mr. Mayor.
Got a motion to go into closed session by Mr. Impey. Do I have a second? Second. Second by Mr. Altamont. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Board will go into closed session to discuss the need to go to executive session.
All right. A lot of information.
Yeah, me too. You see him at the news.
I saw that. I saw that.
Almost well. Your membership of that club is long through this to
I thought about you in a second.
Yes, I'll send PDF of everything.
Turn back on?
Yeah. Email my assistants too.
everybody?
Okay.
Hello? Yeah, excuse me. Quiet with the other announcement.
Thanks for cutting the line.
Motion made by Mike Impey, seconded by Ricky Alderman, to stay in executive session to discuss the Elaine litigation. That's what they said.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Did I pronounce it wrong? I'm sorry. Did I pronounce it wrong?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Is it a line? Is that what you said?
Yeah, I think you should.
Okay.